couple things to think about here is when we give admin time for snow days, you know, all of our employees are tribal employees, like your employees up here in other areas, other departments. You know, they don't make up those days either, but I think with my experience in the public school side of things, usually it's board members wanting to make sure the teachers are fulfilling their contract to that day count. And it comes down to where they're considered part-time employees, they don't work in the summer. The other thing that we have an advantage over most public schools is most public schools can't afford to offer summer school. And we offer 6 weeks for summer school for all students. So I'm not too worried about the day count. We have 3 days right now. So I think as we build our calendar, we want to make it so that somewhat when a teacher would get a contract from us versus a contract from maybe Alina. I use them as an example. They're at 165 contact days as well, so they're the same number of days. And if we're paying $50,000 for that teacher and they're paying $49,000, but just for the same days, you know, we want to be competitive in that market. So, you know, we're gonna. I'd like to get. At one point, we had 166 days and 175 days. So we kind of work it right around that area, and it comes down to getting started after our fair, and then having our L&I parade, which we have gone to historically for many years, and then trying to finish before Memorial Day. So that's kind of how we fit that calendar in, and then honoring tribal holidays, and federal holidays along with. You know, we take a couple days there, but most of it's professional development. So just so I wanted you to have an understanding of the context that goes into building that calendar, so that when I bring it to you next month for approval, we're just not shooting from the hip. There's a lot of thought goes into it. It's not. It's something that I look at other school districts as well, and try to fall in line with what they have. So that's all I had today. Not a real long report, but I don't know if there's any questions or anything that we have going on out there right now. I did have something that happened, happened this morning actually, but we started this process last week. We had a science teacher that's got a PhD from Pierre that reached out to us and wanted to know if we want to hire her. And she works with the Discovery Center. Chris introduced me to her last year, and she does science activities with a lot of tribal schools. China River, she's an adjunct at Lakota, and she does quite a bit of work in the Lakota tribe. And she's got a teaching background from the Spokane area, the Native American Reservation School there. And she reached out. We got a verbal commitment that she's coming. So.
For the rest of this school year?
Yeah, and it happens to be not for the rest of the school year, but for next year.
Okay.
And her friend is our current science teacher from Northern that teaches from here, that brings she broadcasts into our kids every day. So she's very familiar with our school, very familiar with the program that we ran. So that says a lot about our school when people are reaching out with their qualifications to come here.
And Mr. Chairman, as long as Lance is here, can we give you a quick update on the tribal broadband?
Sure. Pretty good contact, Lance.
That was a neat call to get.
Oh, are they all the same? Are they all the same?
Yeah. So there should be 4 from there, there's 1 more with here.
She actually asked if she could bring her kids if she wanted to come to school.
Okay, that money, as many of you know, is kind of being jeopardized with John Thune and Golden West. We did send some documents off to the tribal broadband people in DC, including the resolution that allowed Golden West to come onto the reservation and bury that fiber. That was one of the intentions in that whole thing with Thune. We did then last week go in and accept those funds, and you can see it's circled there at 2.675 million. And that the funding opportunity number down below, this was a competitive grant that we had submitted, so we worked hard to get these funds. And so now as it is, the money is there, and we're talking about drawing it down. But first, next week, when that farm audit goes on, we're also gonna have some folks from the tribe's cyber security company there in Sioux Falls, and they're going to potentially help us with these funds. And we'd like to have them be a part of this, not only because they understand to some degree what's going on here, but also it gives the tribe's company some experience in administering federal dollars, and it would be kind of a past performance thing. So we'll be going over that with them. We'll also be taking a close look at this $2.6 million budget to see how we can break that out and use it for the contractors that have helped us get this grant, to make sure then that we've got enough money to get the infrastructure in here, and as well as working with Ron Brown and that department to see where they factor in on it, and make sure then that we've got enough money to support that staff, and that we're gonna have enough money at the end of the day to get as much infrastructure in here as we can. And there is one thing to keep in mind, and that is if Thune continues, and Lance and I and the committee got to take a look and see if we want to or need to give more information to the broadband desk in DC there, the connectivity people there, to see if Thune is going to continue with what he's doing as well as Golden West. Now Lance will tell you a little bit about what we're doing to kind of counter that. And so if there's no more questions for me, we're going to be real cautious on drawing any funds down and spending anything until we know that the coast is clear, and then we're not going to have to turn around and repay these guys because of Thune.
Because of Thune, on your second page there, the small print says, if not electronically signed without recipient within 30 days, grants officer may terminate this award.
And we did that on last Tuesday, I believe it was the chairman did. And you can see it says that this document is locked, and the chairman has access to it, so him and I will be getting together to make sure then that when we start drawing these funds down, that we're not taking money that is dubious or questionable because of what Thune's doing. But if we don't crack into it pretty soon, it's just like what you say. We've signed it. It's just what we want to make sure that when we draw it down, that we're doing it without having somebody come back and say, hey, wait a minute.
So what's your infrastructure look like? Those towers? How many towers?
So the goal here was to, when we put this together, was to expand our footprint beyond just the kind of the urban area of Lower Rural, I guess you call it. Move out to the west, and move out to the north and to the south. And there's some of those, I think we've identified 29 homes that weren't served by Golden West, and also I think 2 institutions, propane plant, and there's one, wildlife, or now the farm. And so we built some additional towers out that way. But the thing that's probably gonna limit us a little bit would be like, so the modems that you actually put in the homes, we might not be able to buy through this grant for homes in Lower Rural. Those aren't a very expensive part. I mean, they're relatively in big terms of 2.6 million. I mean, that probably was maybe $100,000 or something. I don't know, I'm just throwing a dart out there, but it was a small portion. So it would be building up the one we have, the stuff we have currently, to make it more robust to reach those areas, but it would also obviously make everything around here a lot stronger in signal. So we believe that by putting this all in play, that would make that a very viable internet source for everybody.
Then Golden West comes in and lays some ground wire.
They already
Where
have.
They already have. That's what the complaint is. I think there was,
Is that those boxes we got in our houses?
Those are probably ours, from the initial build.
No, we was talking about the ones when after they did the fiber
Right.
installation, and they contracted with a company that was out of Mitchell
That put them on the
and put
outside.
the boxes on the inside the house.
Inside the house, okay.
And I will say, with the same thing that Dune is doing with Golden West to us, they're also doing to Rosebud.
Yeah.
and that's what we gotta get back and see if it's going to make any sense for us to couple up with those folks to, and you know, John, or Kuhn is a minority member of that committee. And so we have Tester and Klobuchar, and we've been told to go ahead and contact those folks and rattle John's cage a little bit. So that's again, what we're being cautious about. And the broadband folks can only tell us so much. We have to be aggressive on our own to save this thing. So is it in the bank? It looks like it is, but
For them to approve us on this grant, did they approve us before or after John threw his fit?
it was pretty much approved after John came in.
Yeah, so.
The other thing is we need to get it out there, public information on Akita Cyber Company, the cyber security company. We need to discuss the board for that cybersecurity.
Sure.
Who's all on it, head of it, who should be on it. Should definitely be some tribal members on there. We're not saying any of us, we've got enough to do, but
Well, and it's the same thing with me.
it's a cybersecurity firm that looks for government contracts to provide cybersecurity services.
They did come in and meet.
That was before you took office with us.
Well, I mean, my biggest question is, you know, it's all great with all this broadband and all this stuff, and that was one of the main questions. We can actually be more on the IT side of it, protecting even the broadband and the stuff that goes in. But the one thing I also really want to kind of throw out there is how are we approaching data sovereignty for our reservation?
Well, it goes back to, again, this licensing process. If you're talking about how we're putting out, our wireless network, and then the license we need for that, the funds that come along with that. We've got a grant in right now, an application for $125,000 to work with a company to help us set that up. And without going into detail there, we haven't heard from them, but I do have them up on my desktop now to call them today to find out, or tomorrow to find out where that funding is at, because that's gonna help us organize this a little bit more from a professional standpoint. Because, again, IT with us doesn't have this expertise. That's why we have to pay two of these other companies to set all this up.
I think the reason why I bring up data sovereignty, especially on these issues, is ownership. Anything that we put on the deal that goes out there from either a tribe or anything, who has that ownership, is what I'm asking. Is that gonna be easy to access, so Joe Schmo could sit there and hack in and get all this? What I'm sitting there saying is, how are we approaching that in that type of way? Because that's even it's a growing thing with the IT and with the internet and everything, but how are we approaching that as a data sovereignty type of situation? How can we be the true owners of it without somebody coming in and saying, hey, I'm gonna take this, like FBI, or somebody comes in and says, well, we need this, yeah, but we own this, you can't come and take this. That's what I'm saying, bringing across. I mean, I understand with the broadband and with everything we're getting in, the infrastructure, but I
Are you
think that's
talking about firewalls then, pretty much, protecting the tribes?
it's more like in the lines of all property that belongs to the tribe or belongs to the schools, goes to the schools, and that's theirs, and no one should have that access to it.
I see what you mean.
And how are we actually approaching that? Because in the end, that's an issue that we don't approach much. I mean, I've just seen this on the outside of being on the outside of sitting there looking at So if we do a grant thing, but somebody wants it, they could just log into our stuff and get whatever they want.
Yeah.
And-
Well, I think the good thing that the council has done is purchase this company, this Akichicha, with the idea that these people are experts in cybersecurity. And, you know, one of the couple things with this is I think you have the right and the ability to commit this contract to them. And then this tribally owned, the company, and then they also have a company that specializes in security. And I think the one thing that's kind of the fight that we're having between the fiber that was laid versus this airspan system that we're building is, this is sovereignty. This is sovereignty, but this is the tribes.
Yeah.
Whereas prior to not knowing, you know, that if nobody's fault, that, you know, we're at the whim of Golden West taking in fiber, and that's the only way we had to get it. But now that we own our airspan, we own, the tribe is committed to owning their